The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the weathered wooden sign that read, Hawthorne, Montana Territory, and Zelda Brennan pressed her gloved hand against the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack through her ribcage like a wild horse breaking through a fence. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia with nothing but 2 carpetbags, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a secret that could either save her or destroy any chance she had at this new life. The year was 1881, and she was 23 years old, unmarried by choice until now, and about to meet a man she knew only through 5 carefully worded letters that had promised her safety, respectability, and a home on the frontier. The driver yanked open the door and offered his weathered hand. Zelda gathered her dark blue traveling dress and stepped down into the dusty street, blinking against the brilliant Montana sunshine that seemed determined to blind her after the dim interior of the coach. The town was smaller than she had imagined, just a single main street lined with wooden buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. A general store, a saloon with peeling paint, a livery stable, and what appeared to be a church at the far end were the most prominent structures. Miss Brennan. A deep voice cut through her observations, and she turned to find a tall man standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. He was older than she had expected from his letters, perhaps 30, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of strong coffee. His jaw was sharp and clean-shaven, and his shoulders were broad beneath a well-worn work shirt. "I am Samuel Zimmerman. I hope your journey was not too difficult." Zelda swallowed and forced herself to meet his gaze directly. Her father had always said she had too much confidence for a woman, that it would be her downfall, but it was also the very thing that had kept her alive these past 3 years. "Mr. Zimmerman, the journey was long, but I survived it well enough. I am pleased to finally meet you in person." Samuel stepped forward and retrieved her bags from where the driver had deposited them in the dirt. "Please, call me Samuel. We are to be married, after all. The Reverend is expecting us at 4 this afternoon, if that suits you." "I know it is sudden, but I thought perhaps you would prefer to have things settled quickly rather than endure the gossip that comes with an unmarried woman staying at the boarding house." His consideration surprised her. Most men in his position would have simply told her what was happening rather than asking her preference. "That would be acceptable. I confess I am eager to have the journey behind me in all respects." He nodded and began walking down the street, and she fell into step beside him. The few townspeople who were out in the afternoon heat stopped to stare, and Zelda kept her chin high, ignoring the whispers that followed in their wake. She had endured far worse than small-town gossip. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town," Samuel said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "It is not much, just a small operation with cattle and horses. I have a foreman, Jack, and 2 ranch hands who help during the busy seasons. The house is modest but sound. I built it myself 3 years ago. I am sure it will be more than adequate." Zelda adjusted her bonnet against the sun. "Your letters mention that you lost your wife 2 years ago. I am sorry for your loss." Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Consumption took her. It was a hard winter, and the doctor could not save her. "We had no children, which was probably a mercy given what happened. I do not expect you to replace her, Miss Brennan. I simply need help running the ranch and someone to share the burden of this life. The frontier is not kind to those who face it alone." His honesty was almost brutal, but Zelda appreciated it more than she would have appreciated false sentimentality. "I understand completely. I promise I will work hard and do my part. I am not afraid of hard work." They had reached a small white church with a simple cross mounted above the door. Samuel paused and looked at her directly for the first time since they had started walking. "Before we go in, I need to ask you something. Your letters were somewhat vague about why you left Philadelphia. I do not need to know your entire history, but I need to know if there is anyone who will come looking for you, anyone who might bring trouble to my ranch." Zelda's mouth went dry. This was the moment she had been dreading since she had first responded to his advertisement in the newspaper. She could lie, keep her secret hidden and hope it never surfaced, or she could tell him the truth and risk him sending her back on the next stage coach. "There is no one looking for me. I left Philadelphia because I was tired of living under the restrictions placed on women in polite society. I wanted a life where I could be useful, where my skills would be valued rather than hidden away as inappropriate." It was not quite the whole truth, but it was not exactly a lie either. Samuel studied her face for a long moment, and she forced herself not to look away. Finally, he nodded. "That is fair enough. Everyone who comes west is running from something. As long as your past does not follow us, I have no complaints." The wedding ceremony was brief and businesslike. The Reverend, an elderly man with kind eyes and trembling hands, read from his worn Bible and asked them to repeat their vows. Zelda spoke her promises clearly, and Samuel's voice was steady as he pledged to honor and protect her. There were no rings, no flowers, no guests except for the Reverend's wife who served as a witness. When it was over, Samuel signed the marriage certificate with a firm hand, and Zelda added her own signature below his, the ink drying quickly in the warm air that drifted through the open church door. They left Hawthorne as the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains. Samuel drove the wagon with easy competence, and Zelda sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape change from dusty streets to rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it was weighted with all the things they had not said, all the truths still hidden. The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill, and Zelda felt something in her chest loosen slightly. The house was indeed modest, a simple rectangular structure with a covered porch and shutters that had been painted a cheerful blue. Behind it stood a barn, a corral with several horses, and what looked like a chicken coop. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat, and the land rolled away in all directions, golden and vast under the enormous sky. "It is beautiful," Zelda said, and she meant it. There was something about the openness of it all that made her feel like she could finally breathe properly for the first time in years. Samuel glanced at her, and something that might have been relief crossed his face. "I am glad you think so. Some women from back east find it too empty, too isolated. I prefer isolation to crowds." Zelda climbed down from the wagon before he could come around to help her, and immediately a large dog came bounding around the corner of the house, barking joyfully. She froze, unsure if the animal was friendly or protective, but Samuel whistled sharply and the dog immediately calmed, trotting over to sit at his feet. "This is Bear. He is friendly once he knows you." Samuel scratched behind the dog's ears and the animal's tail thumped against the ground. "Come on, I will show you the house." The interior was clean and surprisingly well organized for a bachelor's home. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy wooden table with 4 chairs near the window. Shelves lined another wall, holding dishes, books, and various supplies. 2 doors led off the main room, and Samuel gestured to the one on the left. "That is the bedroom. I can sleep out here on the floor if you prefer, until you are more comfortable with the arrangement." Zelda turned to face him, and she saw the weariness in his eyes, the loneliness that he carried like an extra weight. She thought of her own loneliness, The years of pretending to be something she was not, the constant fear of discovery. "We are married, Samuel. I do not expect you to sleep on the floor in your own home. I am not some delicate flower who needs to be coddled." He studied her for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of respect mixed with curiosity. "All right then. I need to check on the cattle before dark. There is bread and cheese in the pantry if you are hungry. Make yourself at home." After he left, Zelda stood in the center of the main room and slowly turned in a circle, taking in every detail of her new home. It was nothing like the ornate Philadelphia townhouse, where she had spent the first 20 years of her life, with its gilt-framed paintings and Persian rugs and servants who moved silently through the halls. This was real and honest and hers, at least in part. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses on pegs in the bedroom and placing her mother's Bible on the small table beside the bed. At the bottom of her second carpet bag, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, was the source of both her pride and her fear. She unwrapped it slowly, her fingers trembling slightly as she revealed the leather case that held her surgical instruments. The scalpels gleamed in the fading light, each one perfectly sharpened and maintained. Beside them were sutures, forceps, and a small vial of carbolic acid for sterilization. These tools had been her constant companions for 3 years, hidden away in the basement of a sympathetic doctor's home in Philadelphia, while she learned the skills that were forbidden to women. The knowledge that could see her arrested or committed to an asylum if the wrong people discovered what she had been doing. Dr. Harrison had been her father's friend, and when her father died suddenly of a heart condition, leaving her penniless and alone, Dr. Harrison had offered her a choice. She could marry one of the respectable but tedious men who had begun circling like vultures, or she could come work for him, learning medicine in secret, helping him with patients who could not afford proper care or who were too afraid to seek it. For 3 years she had studied anatomy, practiced sutures on pieces of leather, and then on the bodies of the dead who had no one to mourn them, learned to set bones and deliver babies and diagnose illnesses. She had been good at it, better than good, and Dr. Harrison had told her more than once that she had a natural talent, that it was a crime she could not practice openly. But then Dr. Harrison had died, and his son had discovered what they had been doing. The threats had come quickly after that, promises to have her arrested for practicing medicine without a license, to spread rumors that would destroy what little reputation she had left. So she had run, taking her instruments and her knowledge and fleeing west where no one knew her, where she could start fresh as just another mail-order bride looking for a new life. Zelda rewrapped the instruments carefully and hid them at the bottom of the wardrobe, beneath a spare blanket. She would not need them here. She was simply Samuel's wife now, nothing more, nothing less. The thought should have been comforting, but instead it felt like a small death, a burial of the person she had worked so hard to become. Dinner that night was a quiet affair. Samuel returned as darkness fell, and they shared the bread and cheese along with some dried beef and canned peaches. He asked polite questions about her family, and she gave equally polite answers, explaining that her father had been a banker who had lost everything in a bad investment, that her mother had died when she was young, that she had no siblings. It was mostly true, with just enough lies woven in to hide the parts she could not share. "What about you?" she asked, turning the conversation away from herself. "How did you end up in Montana?" Samuel leaned back in his chair, his plate empty. "I came west after the war. I fought for the Union, and when it was over, I could not go back to the way things had been before. Too much had changed, and I had changed with it. I heard there was good land out here for anyone willing to work for it, so I came and filed a claim." Built this place with my own hands and bought my first cattle with money I saved from working at the lumber mill in town. It has been hard, but it is mine. No one can take it from me." There was something fierce in his voice, a determination that Zelda recognized because she felt it in herself. "I understand that, the need to build something that belongs to you alone." "Do you?" Samuel stood and began clearing the dishes. "Most women I have met want security, want to be taken care of. They do not understand the need to carve out your own piece of the world." Zelda rose and took the dishes from his hands, carrying them to the basin. "Then, perhaps, you have been meeting the wrong women." She felt his gaze on her back as she began to wash the dishes, but he said nothing more. After a moment, he went outside to check on the animals one final time, and Zelda finished cleaning up, her movements efficient and practiced. By the time he returned, she had changed into her nightgown and was sitting at the table, braiding her long dark hair. That first night in the bed they shared was awkward but not unpleasant. Samuel stayed on his side and Zelda stayed on hers, and they both pretended to fall asleep much faster than they actually did. In the darkness, Zelda listened to his breathing gradually slow and deepen, and she allowed herself to relax slightly. This could work, she told herself. She could be content here, could learn to be just a rancher's wife, could let her old dreams die quietly. But 3 weeks later, everything changed. It started when one of the ranch hands, a young man named Tommy with red hair and a perpetual sunburn, came galloping up to the house in the middle of the afternoon, his horse lathered with sweat. Zelda had been in the garden, pulling weeds from around the vegetables she had planted, and she stood quickly when she heard the shouting. "Mr. Zimmerman, you need to come quick. Jack has been hurt bad." Samuel emerged from the barn at a run, and Zelda followed without thinking, hiking up her skirts to keep pace. "What happened?" "One of the bulls got aggressive during the branding, caught Jack with his horns and threw him into the fence. He is bleeding something fierce and his arm is bent all wrong." Tommy's face was pale beneath the sunburn. "We got him to the bunkhouse, but I do not know what to do." Samuel was already moving toward the bunkhouse, a small structure behind the barn where the ranch hands slept. Zelda followed, her heart pounding not with fear but with a sudden, fierce focus that she remembered from those late nights in Dr. Harrison's office. She had not felt this particular clarity in weeks, and it sang through her veins like music. Jack was lying on one of the narrow beds, his face gray with pain and shock. His right arm was clearly broken, the bone visible through a tear in his flesh, and blood was pooling beneath him from a gash in his side. The other ranch hand, a quiet older man named Pete, was trying to press a wadded shirt against the wound, but his hands were shaking. "We need to get him to town, to the doctor," Samuel said, but even as he spoke, Zelda could see him calculating the time it would take, the blood Jack would lose on the journey. "He will not make it to town." The words were out of Zelda's mouth before she could stop them. "He will bleed out before you get him halfway there." Samuel turned to look at her, and she saw the desperation in his eyes. "What choice do we have?" This was the moment. She could stay silent, let them take Jack to town and hope for the best, keep her secret safe. Or she could step forward and become, once again, the person she had been forced to leave behind. Zelda looked at Jack's gray face, at the blood that continued to seep despite Pete's efforts, and she knew there was really no choice at all. "I can help him." She moved forward, pushing past Samuel, her voice taking on the crisp authority that Dr. Harrison had always used in emergencies. "But I need you to trust me and do exactly as I say. Pete, keep pressure on that wound. Tommy, I need you to bring me hot water as much as you can boil and clean cloth. Towels, sheets, anything that has been freshly laundered. Samuel, I need you to help me set up a proper workspace and then hold him down because this is going to hurt." For a long moment, no one moved. They all stared at her as if she had started speaking in tongues. Then Samuel said, "What do you mean you can help him? Are you a nurse?" Something like that. "There is no time to explain. If you want Jack to live, you need to let me work." She locked eyes with Samuel, willing him to trust her, to see that she knew what she was doing. Samuel looked from her to Jack and back again, and then he nodded sharply. "Tommy, Pete, do as she says. Move." The men scattered to follow her orders, and Zelda turned back to Jack. She had treated worse injuries than this in the basement of Dr. Harrison's house, stitching up knife wounds and setting shattered bones for the people who came to the back door in the dead of night, too poor or too afraid to seek help elsewhere. Her hands were steady as she examined the wounds, assessing what needed to be done first. "Samuel, I need you to go to the house. In the bedroom, in the bottom of the wardrobe under the spare blanket, there is a leather case. Bring it to me immediately and do not open it." He ran without question, and Zelda continued her examination. The gash in Jack's side was deep but had missed any vital organs, and the broken arm was the more immediate concern because of the bleeding from the exposed bone. She had done compound fractures before, had reset bones and stitched the flesh closed, but never in front of witnesses who knew her as just a rancher's wife. Samuel returned with her surgical case, and his hands shook slightly as he handed it to her. She opened it without ceremony, revealing the gleaming instruments inside, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. There was no time to explain, no time for anything except the work that needed to be done. "Hold his shoulders," she told Samuel. "Pete, you hold his legs. This is going to be extremely painful, and he is going to fight you." She had never worked so quickly or so carefully. Using the hot water Tommy brought, she cleaned the wounds with carbolic acid, ignoring Jack's screams as the antiseptic burned through the damaged tissue. She reset the bone with a decisive movement, feeling the pieces slide back into alignment. And then she began the delicate work of stitching the torn flesh closed, her sutures neat and precise. The gash in his side required similar treatment, and by the time she tied off the final stitch, nearly 2 hours had passed. Jack had mercifully passed out from the pain about halfway through, and the other men watched in silence as Zelda wrapped his arm in a splint she fashioned from wooden slats and clean cloth. When it was finished, she stepped back, her dress stained with blood, her arms trembling from the sustained focus. "He needs to rest and keep the wounds clean. Change the dressings twice a day using boiled water and this carbolic acid solution. If he develops a fever or the wounds show signs of infection, come get me immediately. He should not use that arm for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer." She cleaned her instruments methodically, refusing to look at any of them, refusing to see the questions and the shock written across their faces. Only when everything was packed away did she finally raise her eyes to meet Samuel's gaze. "I need to wash up." She walked past him, out of the bunkhouse and across the yard to the house, moving like someone in a dream. Inside, she poured water from the pitcher into the basin and began scrubbing the blood from her hands, watching it swirl pink in the water. She heard the door open behind her, heard Samuel's footsteps, but she did not turn around. "What are you?" His voice was not angry, but it was confused, almost bewildered. "Where did you learn to do that?" Zelda dried her hands carefully, still facing away from him. "I told you I had skills that were considered inappropriate in polite society. This is what I meant. I was trained by a doctor in Philadelphia for 3 years. I learned surgery, anatomy, diagnostics, everything a proper medical student would learn. But I am a woman, so none of it matters. Women are not allowed to practice medicine. are not allowed to save lives, because apparently we are too delicate or too stupid or too emotional to be trusted with such things. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. She had thought she had made peace with it, had accepted that her medical career was over. But standing here with Jack's blood still under her fingernails, feeling the familiar satisfaction of having done the work well, she realized how much she had missed it, how much of herself she had been trying to bury. "You lied to me." Samuel's voice was flat. "When I asked if anyone would come looking for you, if your past would bring trouble, you lied." Zelda finally turned to face him. "I did not lie. No one is looking for me. I made sure of that before I left Philadelphia, but I did not tell you everything. That is true. Would you have still married me if you knew? Would you have wanted a wife who had done things that could get her arrested, who had skills that made her unmarriable to any respectable man?" Samuel stood very still, his face unreadable. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, and Zelda felt her heart sinking with each passing second. She had risked everything to save Jack's life, and now she was going to lose the fragile security she had fought so hard to build. Then Samuel said, "Show me." "What?" "Show me what else you know. Teach me. We are hours away from the nearest doctor, and men get hurt out here all the time. If you have knowledge that could save lives, that could keep my men safe, then that is not something to hide. That makes you valuable beyond measure." Zelda stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want me to teach you? You are not angry that I kept this from you, angry. Zelda, you just saved Jack's life. You did something I have seen field surgeons struggle with during the war, and you did it in a bunkhouse with makeshift equipment and no hesitation. Why would I be angry about that?" Samuel stepped closer, and for the first time since they had met, she saw genuine warmth in his eyes. "I am married to a woman who can do the impossible. Your talents make you priceless. I only wish you had felt safe enough to tell me sooner." Something cracked open inside Zelda's chest, something that had been locked tight for so long she had forgotten it was there. Tears burned her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "I was afraid you would send me away. I was afraid you would see me as some kind of freak, as improper and unnatural. The only unnatural thing I see is a world that would waste such a gift." Samuel reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "You do not have to hide here, Zelda. You do not have to pretend to be less than you are. Out here, survival matters more than propriety. If you can help people, if you can save lives, then that is something to be proud of." For the first time since she had left Philadelphia, Zelda felt like she could breathe fully, like the weight she had been carrying might actually lift. "Thank you. You do not know what that means to me." "I think I am beginning to understand." Samuel squeezed her hand gently and then released it. "Come on, we should check on Jack before it gets too dark, and then maybe you can tell me everything, the whole truth this time. No more secrets between us." That night, after they had confirmed that Jack was resting comfortably and had eaten a small meal, Zelda and Samuel sat at the kitchen table, and she told him everything. She told him about her father's death, about Dr. Harrison's offer, about the 3 years of secret study and the patients she had treated in the dark. She told him about the threats that had driven her west, about the fear that had followed her every mile of the journey. And Samuel listened without interruption, his face thoughtful in the lamplight. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My wife died of consumption, but before that, she had been sick for months with something else, something the doctor could not diagnose. She had terrible pain in her stomach, could barely keep food down. The doctor gave her laudanum for the pain and told her it was just female hysteria. She died 6 months later, and I have always wondered if a better doctor might have saved her." Zelda heard the grief in his voice, but also the anger, the frustration at being helpless. "I am sorry. That must have been terrible." It was. But it made me realize that doctors are not gods, that they do not have all the answers. If you had been here, could you have helped her? I do not know. Without examining her, without knowing more about her symptoms, I could not say, but I would have tried. I would have done everything I could. Zelda met his gaze squarely. "That is all any doctor can do, man or woman. Try their best and hope it is enough." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then I am glad you are here now, and I am glad you do not have to hide any more." The weeks that followed were some of the strangest and most fulfilling of Zelda's life. Jack recovered well, his wounds healing cleanly without infection, and word spread quickly among the small ranching community about what had happened. At first, Zelda worried that the other ranchers would react with suspicion or hostility, but instead, they began showing up at her door with injuries and illnesses that the town doctor was too far away or too expensive to treat. She set a broken finger for the blacksmith's son, delivered a baby for a young couple who lived in a soddy 10 miles west, and diagnosed a case of appendicitis in a teenage boy, sending him to town for surgery before it ruptured. Each successful treatment built her confidence, reminded her of who she was beneath the role of dutiful wife. And through it all, Samuel supported her, never questioning her decisions, always trusting her judgment. Their marriage, which had started as a practical arrangement between strangers, began to shift into something deeper. Zelda found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the strength in his arms as he repaired a fence, the gentle way he handled the horses, the quiet competence with which he ran the ranch. She noticed the way he always saved the best portions of meat for her at dinner, the way he had repaired the chair that wobbled without her having to ask, the way he listened when she talked about her cases, as if her words were the most important thing in the world. And Samuel, for his part, seemed to be discovering her in return. He asked questions about her medical training, brought her medical journals from town when he went for supplies, built her a small workspace in the corner of the house where she could store her instruments and prepare medicines. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen directed at her before, something that mixed respect and admiration with a growing warmth that made her heart beat faster. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Samuel said quietly, "I want you to know that I am proud to be your husband. What you do, the lives you save, it matters. You matter." Zelda turned to look at him, and in the golden light of the dying day, she saw not the stranger she had married in a rush, but the man who had given her back herself. "I could not do this without you. You gave me the freedom to be who I really am, and that is a gift I never expected to receive." Samuel reached over and took her hand, and this time the touch was not just friendly but something more, something that sent warmth flooding through her body. "I think we make a good team, Zelda Zimmerman, better than either of us expected. We do." She squeezed his hand, and they sat there in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, vast and brilliant in the Montana sky. The turning point came in early autumn, when a rider arrived at the ranch in the middle of the night, pounding on the door with urgent fists. Zelda jerked awake, disoriented, and Samuel was already out of bed, pulling on his trousers. She wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and followed him to the door. The man on the porch was someone Zelda did not recognize, his face haggard with exhaustion and fear. "Are you the woman doctor? Please, you have to come. My wife is having a baby, but something is wrong. She has been in labor for a whole day and night, and the baby will not come. The midwife says there is nothing more she can do, that we should prepare ourselves, but I cannot just let them die. Please." Zelda's mind sharpened instantly, all traces of sleep gone. How far away do you live? About 8 miles south. I have a wagon waiting. Please, I will pay anything. I do not want your money. Zelda was already moving, grabbing her medical bag, changing quickly into her riding clothes. Samuel, I need you to come with me. I might need an extra pair of hands. They rode through the darkness, the wagon jolting over the rough terrain, and Zelda ran through everything she knew about difficult births. A full day and night of labor meant the baby was likely in distress, possibly malpositioned. The mother would be exhausted, weakened, and if the midwife had given up, then the situation was dire. The house they arrived at was a small log cabin, and the sound of a woman's agonized screaming carried clearly through the walls. Zelda grabbed her bag and ran inside, not waiting for permission. The bedroom was lit by several lamps, and a middle-aged woman who must have been the midwife stood in the corner, her face set in resignation. On the bed, a young woman who could not have been more than 20 writhed in pain, her face flushed and soaked with sweat. Zelda moved to the bedside immediately, setting down her bag and washing her hands quickly in the basin of water that sat nearby. I am Zelda Zimmerman. I am going to help you. What is your name? Rosie, the woman gasped between contractions. Rosie Miller. Is my baby going to die? Not if I have anything to say about it. Zelda examined her quickly, and her heart sank when she felt the baby's position. The child was breech, buttocks first instead of head first, and already partially descended into the birth canal. No wonder the labor had stalled. Rosie, your baby is breech. That is why you have been having such a hard time. I am going to try to turn the baby, but it is going to be very uncomfortable. You need to try to relax as much as you can, all right? Just save my baby. Please, I do not care what you have to do. Rosie's voice broke on a sob. Zelda looked up at Samuel, who had followed her inside. Hold her shoulders. Keep her as still as possible. Then to the midwife. I need more light. Bring all the lamps over here. What followed was some of the most difficult work Zelda had ever done. Manually turning a baby during labor was dangerous and painful, and she had only assisted with the procedure once before, under Dr. Harrison's supervision. But she worked carefully, methodically, her hands gentle but firm as she manipulated the baby's position, feeling for the small limbs through the mother's abdomen. Rosie screamed and begged her to stop, but Zelda persisted, knowing that the alternative was death for both mother and child. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, she felt the baby shift, turn, slide into the proper position. There. The baby is head down now. Rosie, with the next contraction, I need you to push as hard as you can. The delivery that followed was swift after that, and when Zelda caught the baby in her hands, a tiny slippery girl with a shock of dark hair, she felt a surge of triumph so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. The baby gasped and then let out a strong, angry cry, and Rosie sobbed with relief. You have a daughter. Zelda cleaned the baby quickly, tied off the umbilical cord, and wrapped her in a clean cloth before placing her in Rosie's arms. She is perfect. You did beautifully. The husband, who had been waiting anxiously outside, came rushing in at the sound of the baby's cries, and the joy on his face as he looked at his wife and daughter was something Zelda knew she would remember for the rest of her life. The midwife came forward, her expression shifting from resignation to amazement. I have never seen anyone do that, the older woman said quietly. I thought for certain we would lose them both. How did you learn such a thing? A good teacher and a lot of practice. Zelda finished checking Rosie for any tearing or excessive bleeding, satisfied that mother and baby were both stable. Rosie needs to rest now, and the baby should nurse as soon as possible. If you have any concerns, any fever or excessive bleeding, send for me immediately. Outside, As dawn broke pink and gold over the horizon, Samuel helped her into the wagon for the ride home. Zelda sagged against the seat, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that the crisis had passed. Samuel looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "That was incredible," he said finally. "What you did in there, the way you knew exactly what to do, you saved their lives, Zelda, both of them." "I did what I was trained to do." But even as she spoke, Zelda felt the glow of satisfaction warming her from the inside out. This was why she had endured 3 years of secret study, why she had risked everything to learn skills that society said were forbidden to her. For moments like this, when her knowledge and her hands could make the difference between life and death. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "I am in love with you." Zelda's head jerked up, and she stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What did you say?" "I said I am in love with you." Samuel kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was steady, certain. "I think I have been falling in love with you for weeks, but I did not want to say anything because I was not sure how you felt. But watching you work tonight, seeing the passion and the skill and the care you put into saving those lives, I cannot keep it to myself anymore. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, Zelda. You are brave and brilliant and kind, and I do not want a marriage of convenience anymore. I want a real marriage with you. If that is something you might want as well." Zelda's heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. She had spent so long focused on survival, on hiding, on just getting through each day, that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing inside her. But now, with Samuel's confession hanging in the air between them, she could not deny it any longer. "I love you too." The words came out in a rush, and she laughed at the surprise in her own voice. "I think I started falling for you the day you told me my talents made me priceless, the day you saw me for who I really am and did not flinch. I have never had that before, Samuel. I have never had someone who looked at me and saw value instead of impropriety. You gave me that, and I love you for it. I love you for so many things." Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road, and he turned to her, his eyes bright in the dawn light. "May I kiss you?" "Yes." Zelda barely got the word out before his lips were on hers, warm and gentle and perfect. She kissed him back, pouring all of her hope and fear and love into that single moment, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Samuel admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "Then why did you wait so long?" "Because I wanted to be sure. I did not want to rush you or pressure you into something you were not ready for. You came here looking for safety, and I wanted to make sure I gave you that before asking for more." Zelda kissed him again, softer this time, and then settled against his side as he urged the horses back into motion. "You gave me more than safety. You gave me freedom, and that is something I can never repay. You do not need to repay it. Loving you is reward enough." They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, Zelda's head on Samuel's shoulder, both of them too full of new emotion to need words. When they reached the ranch, the sun was fully up, and Bear came running to greet them, barking joyfully. Jack was on the porch, his arm still in a sling but looking healthy and strong, and he waved when he saw them. "Everything all right?" he called out. "Everything is perfect," Samuel called back, and he helped Zelda down from the wagon with exaggerated care, as if she were something precious. And perhaps, she thought as she smiled up at him, to him she was. The months that followed were the happiest of Zelda's life. Her reputation as a healer continued to grow, and people came from increasingly far distances to seek her help. She treated everything from minor ailments to serious injuries, and only once did she have to send someone to the town doctor. a case of tuberculosis that required treatments she could not provide with her limited supplies. Samuel was her constant support, helping her build a small clinic in one of the outbuildings, riding with her to distant homesteads when she was called out in the middle of the night, never once suggesting that she should slow down or do less. Their love deepened and grew more passionate as the autumn turned to winter. The physical intimacy that had been awkward and tentative at first became natural and joyful, and Zelda learned that she had been wrong to think she could not have both her work and a real marriage. With Samuel, she could have everything. In December, as snow blanketed the ranch and made travel difficult, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She had suspected it for a few weeks, the missed courses and the faint nausea in the mornings, but she waited to be certain before telling Samuel. When she finally did, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner one evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for: a baby. His face lit up with such pure joy that it made her heart ache. "Zelda, that is wonderful. Are you sure? Are you all right?" "I am sure, and I am fine. Perfectly healthy." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a child, Samuel, our child." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and she felt him shaking slightly. "I thought after Margaret died that I would never have this, that I would never have a family of my own. But now I have you, and soon we will have a baby, and it feels like more than I deserve." "You deserve everything." Zelda pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. "You deserve happiness and love and a family, and I am going to make sure you have all of it." "We are going to make sure," Samuel corrected gently. "This is our life together, Zelda. Everything we build from here, we build as partners." The pregnancy progressed without complications, and Zelda continued her medical work as long as she was able, only reluctantly agreeing to let Samuel take over the more strenuous cases as her belly grew. She read every medical text she could find about childbirth and infant care, preparing herself with the same thoroughness she brought to everything else. Samuel was attentive without being overbearing, making sure she rested enough but never treating her like she was fragile. In early June of 1882, as the Montana summer bloomed warm and bright, Zelda went into labor. Samuel had wanted to send for the midwife from town, but Zelda had refused, confident in her own knowledge and wanting to experience this most fundamental of medical procedures from the other side. She had delivered so many babies that she knew exactly what to expect, and when Samuel looked at her with panic in his eyes as her contractions grew stronger, she actually laughed. "Relax," she told him between pains. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I know what I am doing. But you are my wife. That is different. It is the same biology whether I am your wife or anyone else. Trust me, Samuel, I have done this dozens of times. But you have never had a baby of your own before. Then I suppose we are both learning something new today." Another contraction gripped her, and she gripped Samuel's hand hard enough to make him wince. "All right, that one was strong. We are getting close now." Samuel had never looked more terrified in his life, and Zelda found it endearing even through the pain. She talked him through what he needed to do, and when the final contractions came and she felt the urge to push, he was ready. She bore down with all her strength, and moments later, Samuel was catching their child in trembling hands, his face awestruck. "It is a boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Zelda, we have a son." She laughed and cried at the same time as Samuel placed the baby on her chest, and she looked down at the tiny red face, the miniature fingers that were already grasping at the air. "Hello, little one. Welcome to the world." They named him William after Zelda's father, and he was perfect in every way. Samuel was a devoted father from the first moment, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor at night when William fussed. Zelda had worried that having a child would mean giving up her medical work, but Samuel insisted that they would find a way to make it all work. "You are too good at what you do to stop now," he told her one evening as he rocked William to sleep. "We will hire someone to help around the house, and I will watch him when you have to go out on calls. This is important, Zelda. What you do saves lives. Our son will grow up knowing that his mother is a hero." "I am not a hero. I am just a woman who refuses to let her skills go to waste." "That is exactly what makes you a hero." Samuel kissed the top of William's downy head. "And I am going to make sure our son grows up believing that women can do anything men can do, that arbitrary rules about what is proper or improper are less important than what is right and good. He will be proud of his mother, just like I am proud of my wife." As William grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Samuel expanded the herd, hired additional help, and built a new barn. Zelda's clinic became an official fixture of the community, and there was even talk of getting her officially recognized as a doctor, though the legal complications were significant. But Zelda did not need a piece of paper to validate what she did. She knew her worth, knew the value of the lives she saved and the suffering she prevented. In the spring of 1885, when William was nearly 3 years old, Zelda delivered twin girls for a family that lived 20 miles to the east. It was a difficult birth, both babies small and early, and she spent 3 days at their homestead making sure mother and children were stable before returning home. She was exhausted when Samuel picked her up in the wagon, but also exhilarated in the way she always was after a successful case. "Two healthy girls," she told Samuel as they rode home through the spring sunshine. "Both breathing well, good color, nursing strongly. The mother lost a lot of blood, but I think she will recover fully with rest and good nutrition." "You are amazing." Samuel shook his head in wonder. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Philadelphia? If you had married some banker and given up medicine?" Zelda shuddered. "I try not to. That version of my life feels like a nightmare now. I cannot imagine being anyone other than who I am, living anywhere other than here with you. I am glad you responded to my advertisement. I am glad you took a chance on a lonely rancher in Montana. You changed my life, Zelda. You made it better in every possible way. You changed mine too. You gave me permission to be myself, and that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." When they reached home, William came running out of the house, followed by the young woman they had hired to help with cooking and cleaning. "Mama, Papa, you are home." Zelda scooped him up, hugging him tight, breathing in the sweet smell of his hair. "I missed you, my darling boy. Were you good for Miss Laura?" "Very good. I helped feed the chickens all by myself." "That is wonderful." Zelda carried him inside, Samuel following with her medical bag, and she felt that deep sense of contentment that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. That evening, after William was asleep and the house was quiet, Zelda and Samuel sat on the porch as they so often did, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Bear was sprawled at their feet, snoring softly, and the night air was warm and fragrant with growing things. "Do you remember that first day I arrived?" Zelda asked quietly. "How terrified I was that you would see through me, that you would realize I was not the proper, conventional wife you thought you were getting. I remember thinking you were beautiful and trying not to stare." Samuel took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I also remember thinking you seemed far too confident and self-possessed for someone who was supposedly desperate enough to become a mail-order bride. I wondered what your story was, what had brought you west. And now you know." "Now I know, and I cannot imagine it any other way. You belong here, Zelda. Not because you are my wife, though I am grateful for that every day, but because this is where you can do the work you were meant to do. This is where you can be who you were meant to be." Zelda leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "I love you, Samuel Zimmerman. I love you for seeing me when no one else would, for believing in me when I had almost stopped believing in myself. I love you for being my partner in every sense of the word. I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love another person." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "I think we should have more children. What do you think?" "I think that sounds wonderful." Zelda smiled into the darkness. "As many as we want. William should have siblings to grow up with, and I always wanted a large family. Then that is what we will have. A large, noisy, happy family. And our children will grow up watching their mother save lives and knowing that women are capable of anything." 3 years later, in the summer of 1888, their second son was born. A robust baby they named Thomas, who had his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Zelda had barely recovered from that birth when she discovered she was pregnant again. And in 1889, they welcomed a daughter named Clara who was small and fierce and had a cry that could wake the dead. The house was always full of noise and laughter, and somehow Zelda managed to balance motherhood with her medical practice, supported every step of the way by Samuel and the small army of helpers they employed. As the years passed, Zelda's reputation spread beyond Montana territory. Medical journals back east began publishing articles about the frontier doctor who performed miracles without formal credentials, and there was talk of changing the laws to allow women to practice medicine officially. Zelda did not hold her breath waiting for legal recognition, but she was pleased that her work was at least being acknowledged. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took her into town for dinner at the newly opened hotel restaurant, and they left the children with Jack and his wife for the evening. It was a rare treat to have time alone together, and Zelda dressed in her finest gown, a deep green silk that Samuel had bought her for Christmas. "You look beautiful," he said when she emerged from the bedroom, and the admiration in his eyes was as warm and genuine as it had been when they first fell in love. "You look rather handsome yourself." Zelda adjusted his collar, smoothing the fabric. "When did we become so respectable?" "I think it happened gradually while we were not paying attention." Samuel offered his arm. "Are you happy, Zelda? Truly happy?" "I am happier than I ever dreamed possible. I have a husband who loves and respects me, 3 beautiful, healthy children, work that fulfills me, and a home that I cherish. What more could I possibly want? I do not know, but if you think of anything, you only have to ask." The dinner was delicious, and they talked and laughed like the young couple they had once been, though now their conversation was peppered with references to children and ranch business, and the patients Zelda had treated that week. Hawthorne had grown over the years, gaining a proper doctor's office and a school and even a small library, and Zelda and Samuel had become pillars of the community. On the way home, as they rode through the moonlit darkness, Samuel said, "Do you ever regret leaving Philadelphia? Do you ever wish you had been able to practice medicine openly, in a proper hospital with all the resources you could want?" Zelda considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like. But I think this life, the one we have built together, is better than anything I could have had back east. Out here, I am not fighting for recognition or battling against prejudice every single day. People accept me for what I can do, and that is enough. And I have you and the children, which I would never trade for any amount of professional recognition. You may not have the recognition, but you have the respect. Everyone in this county knows that you are the best doctor within 200 miles, credentials or no credentials. That is enough for me. more than enough. When they reached home, the children were all asleep, and Jack and his wife left quietly after assuring them that everything had been fine. Zelda and Samuel checked on each child, kissing their sleeping faces, and then retreated to their own bedroom. They made love slowly and tenderly, with the easy familiarity of long practice, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Samuel said, "Thank you for saying yes 10 years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for making it safe to be myself. Thank you for loving all of me, even the parts the world said were wrong." Zelda kissed him softly. "You are my home, Samuel. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. And you are my heart. I love you, Zelda Zimmerman. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." The years continued to unfold in a pattern of hard work and deep satisfaction. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and often asked his mother to explain the medical texts she read. Thomas was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and chasing after the ranch hands, while Clara was a perfect mix of both, equally comfortable helping in the clinic or riding across the prairie with her father. In 1895, when Montana became a state and women were still fighting for the right to vote and practice professions openly, Zelda was invited to speak at a medical conference in Helena. It was the first time she had been asked to present her work publicly, and she was both nervous and excited. Samuel accompanied her, and they left the children in Jack's capable care for the 3 days they would be gone. The conference was held in a grand hotel, and Zelda felt out of place among the formally educated doctors in their expensive suits. But when she took the stage to present her paper on successful treatment of compound fractures in frontier conditions, her nervousness fell away. This was her element, talking about medicine, sharing knowledge that could save lives. She spoke for an hour, detailing her techniques and her success rates, and when she finished, the applause was thunderous. Afterward, several doctors approached her, wanting to know more, asking questions that showed genuine respect for her work. One older gentleman, a professor from a medical college in Boston, shook her hand warmly and said, "Madam, you have accomplished more without formal training than most of my students manage with 4 years of education. It is a travesty that women like you are barred from official practice. I hope to see the day when that changes." "So do I," Zelda replied. "But until then, I will keep doing the work as best I can." On the train ride home, Samuel held her hand and said, "You were magnificent. Did you see their faces when you described that breech birth you turned? They were in awe of you. They were in awe of the work, not me. They were in awe of you. Accept it, Zelda. You are remarkable, and the world is starting to notice." But Zelda found that she did not need the world's notice anymore. She had built a life that satisfied her soul, had found love that fulfilled her heart, and had children who brought her joy every single day. The ranch prospered, her clinic helped countless people, and she and Samuel grew old together with the easy grace of 2 people who had chosen each other and never regretted it. When Clara was 16 and announced that she wanted to study medicine like her mother, Zelda felt her heart swell with pride. It will not be easy. Even now, there are only a handful of medical schools that will accept women, and you will face prejudice and skepticism every step of the way. But it is possible now, in a way it was not for you. Clara's eyes were fierce and determined. "You paved the way, Mama. You showed everyone that women can be doctors. Now I want to be one officially, with credentials and everything. And when I finish, I want to come back here and work with you in the clinic." Zelda pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face. "That would make me happier than I can possibly express. You will be an amazing doctor, Clara. You have the skill and the compassion and the determination. I believe in you completely." Samuel, watching from across the room, smiled. "She is your daughter through and through, stubborn and brilliant and brave." "She gets the stubborn from you," Zelda said, laughing through her tears. "Perhaps, but she gets the brilliance from you." Clara did indeed go to medical school, one of only a handful of women in her class, and she graduated with honors in 1899. She returned to Hawthorne and opened her own practice, working alongside her mother, and together they served the community for many more years. William became a teacher, using his love of learning to educate the next generation, while Thomas took over the ranch when Samuel's joints began to ache too much for the hard physical labor. As Zelda moved into her 50s and 60s, she gradually reduced her workload, letting Clara take on more and more of the active cases while she served as consultant and mentor. She and Samuel spent more time on the porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, telling stories about the old days when Montana was still a territory, and Hawthorne was barely more than a few buildings in the dust. On a warm summer evening in 1915, when Zelda was 67 and Samuel was 72, they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Samuel's hair was completely white now, and his hands trembled slightly with age, but his eyes were still as warm and loving as they had been the day they met. "You remember when you first arrived?" Samuel asked, his voice raspy with age. "You were so fierce and so frightened at the same time, trying so hard to be what you thought I wanted while hiding who you really were. I remember being certain you would send me away the moment you discovered the truth." Zelda leaned against him, fitting perfectly into his side the way she had for more than 30 years. "I remember thinking I would have to bury myself forever to have security. Instead, you bloomed. You became exactly who you were meant to be, and you changed countless lives in the process. I have never regretted for one moment that I placed that advertisement in the newspaper." Samuel kissed her forehead gently. "Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Answering your advertisement was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything, Samuel. Freedom, love, purpose, a family. You made it possible for me to be whole. You were always whole, Zelda. I just gave you space to show it." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one, filling the vast Montana sky. Inside the house, they could hear Clara and her husband preparing dinner, could hear the laughter of their grandchildren, the sounds of a life well lived, and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Zelda thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in 1881, about the secret she had carried like a burden, about the risk she had taken in revealing her true self. She thought about all the patients she had treated, all the lives she had saved or improved, all the difference she had made simply by refusing to let her gifts go to waste. And she thought about the man beside her, who had looked at her talents and called her priceless, who had loved her not despite her unconventionality but because of it. "I love you," she said quietly. "I have loved you for 34 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. And I love you. You made my life an adventure, Zelda Zimmerman. You made it meaningful." Later that night, as they lay in bed together, Samuel's arm around her waist, Zelda felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had lived a life beyond her wildest dreams, had accomplished things that should have been impossible, and she had done it all with the love and support of an extraordinary man who had seen her value when the rest of the world wanted her to hide. In the years that followed, as they both grew older and slower, that love never diminished. Samuel developed heart trouble, and Zelda used all her medical knowledge to keep him comfortable and stable, refusing to let him go without a fight. And when her own health began to fail, her joints stiffening with arthritis that made the delicate work of surgery impossible. Samuel was there to help her, just as he always had been. They died within 6 months of each other in 1919, Zelda going first in her sleep one quiet morning, and Samuel following peacefully, as if his heart simply could not bear to keep beating without her. Their children and grandchildren mourned them deeply, but also celebrated the extraordinary lives they had lived, and the love story that had sustained them through decades of joy and hardship. At the funeral, held in the little white church where they had married nearly 40 years earlier, Clara stood and spoke about her mother's legacy. "My mother was a healer and a pioneer," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "She saved hundreds of lives in her time, brought countless children into the world, and proved that women could do anything men could do if given the chance. But she was also a loving wife and mother, a woman who showed us that you do not have to choose between professional success and personal happiness. You can have both if you find the right partner." She paused and looked at the 2 caskets that sat side by side at the front of the church. "My father gave my mother the greatest gift any person can give another. He gave her the freedom to be herself. He looked at her talents and called her priceless when the rest of the world would have called her inappropriate. Their love was the foundation upon which our entire family was built, and it is a legacy we will carry forward for generations to come." The town of Hawthorne mourned the loss of its beloved doctor and her devoted husband, but it also celebrated them. The clinic was renamed the Zimmerman Medical Center, and a plaque was placed outside detailing Zelda's accomplishments and her contributions to frontier medicine. Clara continued her mother's work for many more years, training other young women who wanted to become doctors, ensuring that Zelda's legacy lived on. And on quiet summer evenings, when the sun set behind the mountains and the Montana sky blazed with color, people in Hawthorne still told the story of the mail-order bride who arrived with a secret skill, and the cowboy who said her talents made her priceless. They told it as a love story, which it was, but also as a testament to what could happen when 2 people found each other at exactly the right moment, when courage met acceptance, when love made room for everything a person could be in the end. That was Zelda and Samuel's true legacy. Not just the lives saved or the ranch built or the children raised, but the proof that real love does not ask you to be smaller or quieter or less than you are. Real love sees you completely and says, with absolute certainty, you are perfect exactly as you are. You are valuable beyond measure. You are priceless. And in that truth, in that love, both Zelda and Samuel found everything they had ever wanted and more than they had ever dared to dream.